that kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
And because they were seeing with red, the frequency of it was such that it caused a particular feedback loop within the visual cortex just because of the red frequency. They found, by the way, to cure this, all the night vision goggles now, by the way, are in green. Okay, and this was, it's like red actually was superior for a lot of different reasons than the green night vision goggles that we've got now. But you would see too much of reality and you'd freak out. So, and you'd crash your helicopter, which wasn't good for the military. Those were expensive.
Well, I guess people who take ayahuasca have similar experiences, too. They see a little more of reality.
And that has to do with the curious substrate of the pineal gland itself. Because the pineal gland, even though it forms from the upper palate, is like an eye in that it has photoreceptors. And so you got to ask yourself, why are we as beings that have evolved in light, where our skin is the the biggest organ we've got, and its sole function really is to deal with light, ultraviolet specifically. Why does a gland in the middle of our skull, in the middle of our brain, where there's no possibility of any light leaking in, why does it have photoreceptors? Interesting thought to ponder on. But you see things with ayahuasca because the chemical stimulates the photoreceptors of the pineal. And so hallucinations are not imaginary. They're not. They're no more illusionary than the supposed reality around us that we think that we're tricked into believing is solid by our 40 or 50 or 60 frames per second mindset. I wrote this software called Vortex, which allows you to see words on a computer screen one at a time. And somebody who uses it consistently can read at rates of like 2,000 words per minute. So I had to get into this whole thing about the visual cortex, about the potential for causing epileptic seizures, and researched it for, maybe 11 or 12 months solid, as well as writing the software to make it work. And had some very interesting visual effects as a result of playing around with flashy lights. Coming from computer screens, which is what convinces me that there's a whole substrate, if you will, of some kind of control stuff coming through the high-definition TVs. Yes. The 1080 frames per second delivery rates.
That wouldn't be surprising at all. I mean, where is there not control?
Well, there is that.
I mean, I can't. There's not, unless you wear tin foil on your head.
Right.
That's.
Well, these days you'd have to be really hard pressed to find tin. You could be stuck with aluminum foil. If you're lucky, you can get the restaurant grade.
That's right. So, all right. Well, I'll forget about the tinfoil hat then. But, you're right. This is what, in the chemtrails going on overhead, which are starting to become known by people are starting to actually take that seriously now. And the genetically modified food and blah, blah, blah. So, and
it does happen exponentially, when you become enlightened to all of the weird stuff going on, you can't help but going out and shouting it into every ear that's willing to listen. And after a while, if they've had, if somebody's had 2 or 3 people shouting at them, they may think to themselves, maybe I'd better pay attention to this.
Absolutely.
Whereas if it was just that one nut, well,
Yeah, in fact, that brings me to, I can segue into somebody who sent in a question, if you'd like to answer one. Sure. And this kind of is what relates to what you were just talking about, which some call the 100th monkey theory. Lynn from Lower Yakima Valley in Washington State asks, what are your thoughts on the studies involving 1% of the total population affecting our physical reality? Couldn't that 1% affect the unbalanced negative plans of the powers that were, PTW, for the balanced and positive?
I would agree that they could, certainly. 1% would be a huge number if it were global. Slightly less significant if it's just national you're talking about. In the United States, in order to have it affect the reality and change things, we'd probably be talking about 3%. Maybe more, maybe slightly more, because we've really been hammered by the powers that were here for a number of generations, and it's going to take us a while to shake it off. We don't, for instance, even acknowledge that we live under a dictatorship in the main.
Right.
It's a dictatorship of two parties run by the same set of banksters. And
right.
there's a lot of people that are acknowledging some of this, but get this. When you think about India, if you have any kind of informed opinion at all, and you think relative to how they store wealth, then you know that in India, gold is king. That's how they store wealth. That's how dowries are made. Big commercial operations take place where gold is the medium of exchange involved, and so on. The same thing for silver is true through a lot of the stands, Uzbekistan, etc., Kazakhstan, and even over into Pakistan. In Egypt, it was a combination of both of them. Down through a lot of the Mideast, it's gold primarily. So you then look at what happens in the larger 350 million people in the United States, and you think, odd that only 2% of us or less are in any way invested in physical metals. And that gives you the idea of how many people are awake.
Yeah, that's a good point. Wow, I never would have thought of it like that. Well, yeah, and there's a lot of monkey business going on with precious metals, isn't there?
Yes, exactly. And as a result of which, the people in India and Egypt and so on, they feel it instantly. Whereas because we don't have that same relationship to reality here, we have only 2% of our population or less that feels it and is aware of it.
Yeah. Wow, interesting.
Sort of an interesting way to think about things if you look at general patterns. I love Buckminster Fuller's work in his early years when he was doing resource analysis, because if you look at these patterns in a broad brush fashion, they can tell you a whole lot. So, for instance, if there was a sudden rush in the United States for the acquisition of personal silver, and coin shops were hammered with long lines, the day I see that, then I'll say, okay, next week there's revolution in this country, because we've crossed the 3% threshold.
Interesting. Well, there's the information that is coming out. I guess Max Kaiser is really pushing for people to buy silver because it has something to do with J.P. Morgan shorting silver. And
oh, sure. It's absolutely horrific. It's terrible. There are these people that have created these financial documents and mythical transactions that are using it to take the hyperinflation that the Ben Bernanke is producing with his Federal Reserve, and they are going to cause people to starve, potentially by the millions, in order to try and save their banker butts from the crimes they've already committed. And in doing so, they've been shorting physical silver to the point where, get this, the latest number I've heard is that if we froze the price of silver today, it would take 5 years of daily buying for them to cover their short position.
Wow.
At today's prices.
Wow.
5 solid years. And no one else could, of the whole planet, no one else could buy silver. I mean, of global planetary silver production, 5 years.
Wow.
So this is like, okay, guys, what other planet you got in your pocket, Where are you going to come up with all this silver? And it's actually, I've got some very interesting contacts I've made over the years, and there's this one particular fellow who's up in, he's actually in Uzbekistan. And he was in the silver reclamation business in the old Soviet days, where they would send him film and he would reclaim the silver chemically, process done all around the planet. As the Soviet empire collapsed, he was in kind of a backwater, but he was in a self-sustaining environment where the work he needed was fed by locals and so on, so he just kept doing it. And over the years, he accumulated quite a bit of reserves of silver. And he's been saying recently that he's been offered $30 and $40 premiums for silver. In other words, whatever the spot price was, plus $30 or $40 for somebody to come on in. He's not selling. He says, no, he's not. He says, you'd offer me $1,000 over, and he says, maybe I'll think about it. But dollar,
Well, and then isn't the price of being artificially kept down, and it should be higher in relation to the price of gold as well? So there's
in a historic ratio level, right? And we used to see gold and silver relative to the population on the planet represent a much larger portion of wealth. In other words, if you go back and look in some particular empires, Persian Empire. I can't think at the time at the moment, but following the Roman Empire collapse, and prior to the big spread of Islam through the region, an ounce of gold would buy you a year's life at a very posh level, and that is to say, it would buy you enough food for a year, rent for a year, and one slave, and enough cows and other things to eat for a year. So, yeah, exactly. And so, in recent times, they said that, oh, well, an ounce of gold will only buy you, a good suit. That's all changing now. So we're not only going back to historical ratios between gold and silver, which used to be 15 to 1, 12 to 1, but that's going to shift. Everybody's going to be just floored because all the time that our data has been showing $600 an ounce per ounce of silver, it's also been showing this real huge reduction in that gold to silver ratio as things proceed from that point on. So the $600 an ounce silver is not a price point to sell at because price is meaningless under those conditions. It is now. But rather, that is a temporal marker. Once you start seeing that the dollar is degraded to the point where an ounce of silver is fetching 600, then shortly thereafter, we're going to start seeing silver come down to maybe 1-to-1 ratio with gold on a global planetary scale. This will be because of the basically this same awakening that's furthering the political process and eventually will further the collapse of the powers that were, is going to produce a planetary need for gold and silver on a level that we haven't really even conceived of. So, and also the silver's been used up in a way that's been hidden from us. There just isn't as much as there used to be.
And in addition to that, China is buying up gold and silver, especially gold, like there's no tomorrow. They're encouraging all of their people to buy it.
Well, especially silver, actually. The Chinese people have always had a relationship to silver that's been very special. The lunar metal, the moon metal, and they've been. And now with their new little ETF thing, that may be the derivative problem that causes the COMEX collapse and this sort of thing. Now, our work shows here that we're going to get back into release language around March 25th. So, and that release language is going to run from then until late October. And so it's going to be quite the debacle. So if it's going to be like the WikiLeaks, then it's going to be like a huge increase in WikiLeaks sort of stuff because it runs so long. It's not merely 2 months. We're talking multiple months. So the March 25th period, I think, is probably when we'll start seeing some of the silver stuff come out, either with the big rush that shows the lines on TV of everybody standing in the coin shops trying to buy silver,